So, Josh, I had a dream that involved you last night. It was not too heavily involved, but a little bit. And you kind of know so where this is going. I'll just leave that blank. But we were going to see a Taylor Swift concert at Disneyland because we won tickets on the radio, but we didn't receive the tickets. So we were going to Disneyland to try to see if just the tickets were there somehow.
Right?
And
We'll just ask Mickey if he has them handy.
yeah, if he was holding on to them, like, haha, here you go. So, uh, so, so we go there, and people are going, we're like, okay, well, we don't know where to get tickets. So this is where like you ended up leaving the dream part a little bit. Sorry, but you
Before the
um,
concert? I'm so sorry, Taylor.
but well, no, because I'm looking for the tickets. So I say, stay here. I'm gonna go try to find the manager of the concert. This is in my dream. The manager of the concert to find out where the tickets are at. So I found the manager of the concert, started talking to her. She's like, oh, I'm so sorry. Um, Radio stations do this, but we don't give tickets to radio stations. Hold on. And then she just gets up, like starts doing a bunch of other stuff with her employees, like just completely leaves me and is like, wait here, I'm going to interrupt what I was just saying to you to like go do this other stuff.
Hmm.
um in the dream, it was like this was her job, part of her job, to talk to me, like to do personnel of concert goers and stuff, but she just left. So, and then but basically the whole thing was that the radio stations do this as a scam, and there were no tickets, and so we that's kind of where it left off. So in the dream, if I didn't wake up, I kind of woke up. In the dream, I knew the plot that I was starting to do is I was just going to make this manager get us into the Taylor Swift concert. So
I feel like
yeah,
that would have been a very long ordeal to somehow get into it. A Taylor Swift at Disneyland concert. Um, I think we got scammed.
probably better than Ticketmaster though. But um,
Two brothers play a game. Two brothers play a game. Two brothers play a game. Then they will rate that game.
So, welcome to Two Brothers Play a Game. I'm Josh.
I'm Chris. We are
And
not
this
necessarily Swifties though.
I
We do.
I
I
would
like Taylor
describe
Swift,
myself
but
as a Swiftie enough.
okay.
I'm not a passionate one, but I would totally take free radio tickets to a concert at Disneyland. That would be amazing.
Okay, I would too. All right. Yeah. Yeah.
uh, this is a podcast not where we discuss Disney and Taylor Swift, though sometimes, but in fact where we play a game that we find on sale for Nintendo Switch. Except things are changing up for 2024. We are
Yeah.
going to be instead exploring the Nintendo Switch Online Expansion Pass library. We'll discuss some smaller titles we individually checked out in the first half of the podcast, and then in the back half, we discuss and review the game or games of the month that we both played. In this month, we originally planned just to talk about Jet Force Gemini, but we decided to add Goldeneye as well, another rare shooter
Yeah.
for the N64, to the list.
Uh-huh.
So we'll be talking about both. But let's start with our A segment of what what little games did you check out so far on the expansion pass library?
So I was almost going to do two, but I ended up sticking to um, playing Sonic Spinball. So not exactly a Nintendo one, but it's in the Virtual
Yeah,
Console,
yeah,
the
it's in
Sega
the
one.
Sega app of the Virtual Console, right?
Yeah, yeah, it is. So I had, I think, did you play it also as a kid? Because it was mostly with our
Definitely
friends.
growing up. I
Yeah,
played a bit of that, but not since.
yeah. I knew I played it somewhere else, and I can't remember where. Probably on another like Virtual Console type thing. But I picked up Sonic Spinball again, so that was fun. I don't know if you want me to go on or if you want to say what you did, and then we can go into each of ours.
Go ahead and let's just talk about Sonic Spinball, and then we'll move on to some of the ones I played.
So I really enjoyed Sonic Spinball as much as I did when I first played it as a kid. I think it's a really fun, unique game. What was very nice for it being the Virtual Console is the ability to like save your own checkpoints basically, and then go back. And I mean, this is for all the Virtual Console stuff, but I loved being able to like save a point that I was at and then go immediately back to that one. That made it a lot nice. So I actually almost beat the whole thing. I got to it was either the last one or the second to last one. There's not a lot of levels. Like I don't know whether or not that you would call them levels. There's not a lot of tables.
Yeah.
So yeah, I feel like I made it pretty far. And I hadn't done that as a kid. And I think a lot of that was because, well, I think both having the experience of a lot of other games since then, and also, again, that I could just save the checkpoint and just keep going back to that instead. And I learned something that I did not know about as a kid, is because I always thought, like, okay, the only way I can control Sonic is with these flippers, and he's just going to go wherever, and I have to just time it exactly right to do whatever. No, I found out, like, either the joystick or the directional pad will actually kind of like make him sort of go in certain directions a little bit. So you can control him a bit when he's, like flying through the tables and stuff, which was really nice to find out and like do. So that also probably like made it a lot easier this time around, because I don't think I tried that at all as a kid. Probably I had no idea. So there you go. Something new with an old game that I played a lot of. Yeah.
So I thought we'd keep our ratings in our A segment down just to 1 or 2 thumbs up. What would you give a Sonic Spinball?
I would give it 2 thumbs up.
Oh, nice.
It's fun.
Starting off on a high note.
Yeah, like I keep saying, like it's different, it's unique, so it's worth a try for sure. And if they ever made a sequel for it, I mean, I would definitely get the sequel too. I know that's like an extra thumb or whatever. But,
yeah. If they haven't yet, I'm afraid that 30 years later, it's not looking good.
It's not going to be like Sonic versus Mario Olympic Pinball Racing
versus Rabbits
Chaos Emeralds or something.
1993 pinball video game developed by Sega, originally on the Game Gear, but also has been on computer. I feel like I played it on computer at some point.
I think that's where I played it.
Now on the Nintendo Switch. Exciting. I'm definitely going to check that one out at some point. The first one that I checked out, did you have you said you didn't have a second one this time?
I ended up not. I thought about it, but yeah.
We will. I have a few games for us to talk about. One I think you should check out, also on the Sega app, I believe originally for the Sega console, not for the Game Gear, was Comix Zone. Comix Comix. Did you play this one?
I feel like I somehow did, like as a kid, but I couldn't tell you where I did it because I mean, we're going to keep bringing up, if we talk about Sega stuff, we're going to bring up our game or our friends who had the game console.
Right.
Because we didn't ever have the Sega, but our like best friends did. And so we'd always go over to their house and like play whichever. I guess I had the Game Gear because I don't know how I played Sonic Spinball otherwise.
I don't remember. I don't remember them having a Game Gear. I remember a different friend who had a Game Gear.
Okay.
But you know, it's possible that they did. Or back in those days, you could always rent one from Blockbuster along with the game.
We might have done that. Yeah.
Which could have been a thing. I do remember the Game Gear famously went through 6 AA batteries in like an hour, which truly was astounding. It was a pretty impressive handheld console, don't get me wrong, but that was something I remember happening far too much. back in the day. So somebody else must have had one.
With many other things, but yeah. But back to Comix Zone. I can't remember. I must have played it later on, not as a kid. I think I only played like a little bit of a level just to say I played it.
I also only played a little bit of the level, but I really enjoyed that little bit of a level.
Okay.
So it's a very simple arcade style beat 'em up, but with this very
Hmm.
fun aesthetic. When the game launches, you get your tiny bit of story before you head into your beat 'em up gameplay of this comic artist seemed to be working in some like New York City loft or something, and lightning strikes his building or something and brings his comics to life like he is drawing a comic, and a villain pops out of his comic and shoves him into the comic. So you are playing on the
Okay.
comics that he is drawing versus various baddies. And I think the implied story is that if you die in the comic, then the villain will be free to go out and be a super villain in the real world. Something
Why
like
not?
that. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's just there for the sake of giving us a
A
premise
story.
to explore comics as
Uh-huh.
a dude who is just an artist. He has fighting skills seem to be very impressive for an artist,
Huh.
but he is punching and kicking and kind of plays like a fighting game, like any other beat 'em up. But the levels are panels of a comic book. And whenever you move to a new panel, he will like do a flip over the white bars in between the comics, or he'll do a I'm trying to think, like a gymnastic move to get to the lower level. And so your goal is you start in the upper left panel and you need to work your way down to the bottom right panel. That's the whole stage. But it was just very fun to see him interact in this changing comic panel levels where a story theoretically is being told in the background of somebody going through a sewer and then fighting a boss or something like that. And it was just very novel. It was very cute,
Mhm.
and also it was a beat 'em up where you had one life, and once you run out of HP, you're back to start, and you need to, effectively put in another quarter. So it wasn't a game I was willing to invest the time in to make it very far because that would take a lot of practice to make it
Mhm.
deep into this game on one life. But it was really fun, and I think it's definitely worth
Hmm.
everyone checking out. I had not played this one before, so
Okay.
even without the
Yeah.
nostalgia factor, I think it was pretty fun, and I would give it a thumbs up for that.
The really funny thing is, it would always be advertised in comic books that I would read. So
Yep.
it would have like a full page, whatever, and so I'm like, oh, Comic Zone, okay. But we didn't have, like we keep saying, we didn't have any of the Sega systems, so
Um,
couldn't do anything about it.
and it's a good game because comics is spelled with an X.
Yeah, it's the alternative comics.
Let's see. There was one thing I was going to mention that I think you talked about a little bit with Spinball, but the online Switch, the Nintendo Switch Online games seem to be able to, um, they seem to be constantly going through save states. And in Comic
Mhm.
Zone, at least, and I think in other games, I can't recall, you could actually uh, go like rewind time effectively. You could
Mhm.
go into the start menu and just kind of scroll back on this bar and go back to a point. So if you accidentally missed a jump and all of a sudden you're dying, uh, you could just go back a few seconds to before you miss that jump and try again without having to
Yeah.
restart the entire game. And that was awesome. It didn't help when
Mhm.
I ran out of HP because I was very slowly running out of HP, so I'd have to start over anyway. But it was pretty fun.
It
Uh,
makes it, yeah, I think it does make any of these older games a lot more fun. And frankly, we would get frustrated with these
mhm,
games when we were kids because it's exactly what you're saying. Like if you made just a little bit of a mistake, you would go back to start.
mhm.
I feel like I need to talk about a notorious game that was like
Battletoads?
this. Huh?
Battletoads?
No, that was a bad one though. Even earlier than that. Well, that's notorious. Like it was fun, but terrible.
The Disneyland one?
Also
For
bad.
Nintendo?
Actually, but that one was because none of these are going to be on the virtual system because they were made by other companies, basically. But yeah, the Adventures in the Magic Kingdom is notorious, but it's so addicting to try to
Yeah,
complete that
that was
it
a
was
good
like
game.
frustrating, but not frustrating. But no, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, the like really original one.
The Nintendo one.
Uh-huh.
That
And like
was
as a
tough.
kid, I was always like, oh my gosh, I just am bad at video games. And then now, because there's so much, that people are able to post online about having played it and everything, they're like, no, this was notoriously horrible. Like nobody beat this game. So I'm like, oh, it wasn't just me. It just you reached a point where you just could not beat this game, no
Right.
matter how hard you tried. So I'm like, oh, okay. My childhood is redeemed. But yeah, that would have been. I don't even know if a save state would have helped that one. That was
No.
Adventures in the Magic Kingdom. That a save state would have been great to
Mhm.
do and then come back. Yeah. So anyway,
We're probably going to
back
be
to
doing
you
a
played other
lot of
games.
reminiscing as we talk about
Yes.
this by nature of these being old games and us being steadily heading
Old.
towards becoming old.
Yeah.
This could happen
We are
before.
retro. That's what we are. That's
We're still waiting to come back into fashion, though. We'll see how that goes.
Mhm.
Next up, I played Mario Kart Super Circuit for the Game Boy Advance.
Oh.
I did not play this Mario Kart growing up, but I think I played
Oh.
most of the other ones. And it was very much like the Super Nintendo Mario Kart. Um, I think it
Oh.
came out after Mario Kart 64, but the Game Boy Advance wasn't able to
Yeah.
get quite that level of 3D elements. So they reverted back to the Super Nintendo style with these very flat courses, and not just not a lot of depth. Unfortunately, this one was not a hit for me, and I don't think I'd
Okay.
recommend it. I decided not to give it any thumbs up.
Oh.
But it felt too simple. The course design was very simple. The
Mm.
flat element felt unexciting. I couldn't quite put my finger on it. It just didn't feel like no pun intended. It felt like the game had no depth, um, which was disappointing.
Did you play any or like a little bit of original Mario Kart to
I
try to
didn't
compare it?
I didn't go back to it. Visually, it's very
Okay.
similar. I do plan to try the
Okay.
Super Nintendo Mario Kart and Mario Kart 64,
Which is a great
at some
one
point.
from what I remember. Yeah.
Yeah, I loved Mario Kart 64. I'm very excited to
Yeah.
replay that one. And it actually came out 5 years before this Game Boy Advance game, and yet was superior in so many ways. Um,
hmm
so kind of interesting, maybe a little bit of a miss, but also may have just been limited by the Game Boy Advance technology at the time. I just think there's
Did
probably better games to play with your Nintendo Switch Online time. So
yeah,
that's why I didn't
I
get any
understand.
thumbs up.
Did you have a Game Boy Advance also? Did we each
Yes,
have one?
I think we both
Okay.
had a Game Boy Advance.
This was because the Game Boy Advance time was getting into my video game. I don't know what to call it. Like I was starting to not play as many video games and not even necessarily get a console at a time.
Hmm.
Like whatever new one was. Because I think not too long after Advance was when GameCube came out, right?
GameCube and Game Boy Advance, I think, were simultaneous.
Okay.
GameCube.
So that was I had it. I know I had an Advance. I actually still have it somewhere. But you're the one that had the GameCube and would mostly play it, and I think I would sometimes pick up something on it.
Right.
So
Let's
yeah.
see. Came out in 2001 in Japan. Game Boy
Okay.
Advance.
Game Boy Advance did?
That was the GameCube.
Okay.
Game Boy Advance came out in
Probably was about the same
2001 in
time.
Japan. Yeah.
Okay.
So
So I must
contemporaries.
have gotten it. I mean, that was because I were, yeah.
Game Boy Advance.
It just, that was college days for me. So,
Yeah.
oh gosh, now that's probably going to sound too old to the many people listening to it. That's so weird to think about. But that was, so I think I only had the Advance during some college years. And then I picked up an Xbox later on.
Hmm.
No, not Nintendo, but anyway.
The Game Boy Advance quality games. I hope they expand the Game Boy Advance offering on Switch Online because
Did,
it's kind of small, but
yeah,
there's some good ones in there.
but I couldn't remember what there even was. But again, that was kind of my like dark days of video games. So yeah.
Lastly, for our A segment, I played Wave Racer on the N64,
Oh,
and
oh,
that holds up. That one, for being
that,
a
oh, really?
25-year-old game, it still
Yeah,
looks and plays pretty smooth. Like I could see a game like this still being pretty popular.
because we
I think
love
they
that
made,
game.
yeah, I think they made one sequel on like the Game Boy Advance or something
Mhm.
that probably wasn't worth it. But I don't know. I didn't play it. But Wave Racer, I don't I think they're I can't remember if this is the original or if this is a sequel to a Nintendo game, but either way, it's very fun. The course design was pretty simple, but there was a lot of interesting environmental design, and the courses would change over time. Like the tide would go in and out between the first lap, second lap, third lap, and that was really fun. For no reason, you could do like spins and tricks on your jet ski. This is a jet ski racing game. Um, but they put that into the game, which was just a nice touch. There's no tricks, there's no boosts or anything for doing a flip, but it could be a fun thing that you want to do with your friends. And I really had a good time with it. It's a pretty short game. There's only 9 courses overall, and I did a full tournament of
Oh,
it, and
yeah.
and it was challenging at the beginner normal difficulty. Um, and I had a ton of fun. I imagine uh, trying. I did manage to get first place, just barely, but I imagine trying to do that in the second and third difficulty levels
Yeah.
would be pretty tricky, and it would take some practice and course memorization. It was a well-made game. It's not a big game, but it was really tightly made where it felt like you had control of your wave racer, your jet ski, nicely, but also you would launch off a wave, you'd be in the air, you can't control that, but it would feel like as soon as I touch water again, then I'll be back in control. So it's challenging but also very dynamic in that
Mhm.
regards, and I really enjoyed that. So I'm going to give that 1 thumb up, almost made it 2 thumbs up, but I
Oh,
definitely think it is worth checking out still.
okay. Okay.
So,
Interesting then. Yeah, for how much you were talking about, I thought it was going to get two, but okay.
almost. It was an almost.
Almost.
I'm holding out because I know there's some really good games on this. So I thought
Okay. Fair
I'd
enough.
be like, zero's probably a pass. So one is worth checking out. But I think you'd have like 1 or 2 hours of fun with Wave Racer. I don't think you're going to play the entire game and enjoy every second of it. Um, but
Fair enough.
other
Yeah.
games, you might. So shall we jump into Jet Force Gemini then? And then we'll
Sure.
talk about Goldeneye.
No, let's start with Jet Force Gemini. I feel like
Yeah.
it might be relatively quick, and we have thoughts. I know. So,
Yeah. I I think you could probably sum up what I think about this game as I think the nostalgia overrode how challenging this game's controls were to
mhm.
deal with. Just to get us started, Jet Force Gemini is a third-person action shooter, and I really think it was almost a spiritual predecessor to the Ratchet and Clank games that came on the PlayStation 2
Mhm.
sometime later. Very cartoony with that third-person action shooter. Um, they feel of the same genre, and connected in that regard. So, what'd you think about the presentation of Jet Force Gemini, originally released in 1999?
I was expecting more. It actually surprised me. If we're talking about presentation by how it looks,
Hmm.
because of playing some other virtual console games, they've been able to translate them pretty well to where it's not, like because it's lower graphics, it's easy to just make it look or have it appear bad
Hmm.
on the virtual console. And a lot of times they don't. Like they actually, appear really well. You can see everything really well. I was finding it's like they didn't like not filter it, but they didn't translate it well. But there's something that they just missed in like porting it over. I felt like some of it was just hard to kind of see some stuff that you
Def-
needed to see.
Definitely some muddy
So
textures, and
yeah.
more than a few times there would be a sniper unit or something that was just really hard to pick out because it's just a few
Hmm.
pixels on a background, um,
Yeah.
which just wasn't the funnest challenge. You know, uh, it was an interesting choice. I feel like this game, particular Jet Force Gemini, was almost frustratingly authentic, where it's exactly like it was back in 1999, which is kind of a problem
Hmm.
now.
Yeah. And I mean, mind you, and maybe we should have started too by saying, I mean, you and I enjoyed it on the
Oh yeah,
N64.
this is one of my favorites.
Um, and like it was fine on there, and it is what you're saying. I mean, the TVs were even different back then, and that's
Hmm.
fine. But like, I mean, I'm sure we'll get into it when we talk about Goldeneye on that presentation. Yeah, it just felt like something. It literally like they missed a few pixels to enlarge. So I don't know
The
why.
only positive things that I would say on the presentation for Jet Force Gemini is they made a good use of color, like for creating that
Mhm.
alien cartoony world. I think their color palette was perfect and achieved that. And then
Mhm.
I actually think the sound effects were pretty good in this game. The
Yeah,
way the machine gun sounds and the weapon sound, it had that space age weaponry feel to it, had added a little weight to these little pew pew laser guns. I thought that was pretty well done, and also very nostalgic to hear those sound effects again. That instantly
like the koalas,
recognizable. Oh yeah,
or I don't know what to call them, like the main
the
green
tribals.
koala,
They're kind of like bear-like
tribals,
koalas,
and
but I
yeah,
believe they're called tribals. Uh, Definitely not tribbles. Don't sue us.
no,
Let's touch on the challenging thing of gameplay.
yeah,
Um, it runs fine. I didn't have any
it does.
frame rate issues. I didn't have any hiccups or crashes,
No,
so that's positive. Also, for anyone that didn't play N64 shooters, the N64 only had one thumbstick, unlike nearly every
hmm
other controller since PlayStation. And so what games chose to do, and even some PlayStation games back in the day, struggled to figure out an effective control scheme, contemporaries of Jet Force Gemini. But what they had was your left stick would be forward and backward and turning rather than strafing, which was not how it works anymore. And for
hmm
aiming, because there was only one stick, you would press a shoulder button and that would switch the stick from moving your character to aiming your reticule, uh, which is awkward. And also, it was very rubber bandy. I would describe it as like you'd look
hmm
right and it would pull you back down, or you'd look right too fast and you'd be staring at the sky. Uh, when you're trying to catch a little alien spaceship that's flying around through the air above you, it could be really surprisingly tricky just to hit them, to point at them and hit them, which
yeah,
was didn't make you feel like a cool spacefaring uh, savior hero person. What were your thoughts on the controls and other sorts of gameplay aspects?
Well, the funny thing is, like, I remember in the N64 controls being way easier and way better. That there was definitely, like, the number one thing I'm going to keep saying, like, there's something lost in the translation. And I even
Hmm.
think that there's like a little bit, or like there's one or two buttons that they didn't even like put to let you use.
Right.
Like they didn't even map that out on the Nintendo Switch controllers at all, which is really weird because there's more than enough buttons to do that with. But
Hmm.
because the camera was a really hard thing for me to
Oh
figure out, and I
yeah.
remember in the original, like that was no problem. Like I mastered the camera really well to like see where I wanted to see, so that because a lot of it, like you could kind of sneak around a little bit, and I could not at all because it's like I can't aim worth
Right.
anything. So
Yeah.
that bugged me right off the bat. So
The
yeah.
third person camera perspective was very challenging, and it often
Mhm.
put the camera in a very awkward location where you couldn't see. You're like surrounded by enemies, but all you can see is this tiny little block in front of you. So you are turning your entire body to try to see around corners, and there's lots of little things hidden around here, like these little tribals you need to rescue, these little
Mhm.
koala bears, the ant-like creatures, the alien oppressor ants that you have to fight, who are running around quite quickly. I will say that was very dynamic how the enemies were moving, a little more dynamic than Goldeneye, in just a little bit we'll talk about. Uh, Makes
Mhm.
sense. These are games made by the same developers, and this was the one made in
With
'99
some
versus
time apart.
'97
Yeah.
for Goldeneye.
Yeah.
So probably benefited from being the second to market.
Mhm.
But yeah, them not optimizing the controls for both modern players as well as modern control schemes like the Switch versus the N64 um, was a big miss, and that kind of ruined the game
Yeah.
entirely.
Oh yeah, which is really sad. I mean, again, like I enjoyed it originally, and just and like it playing it on the virtual console, like there's a lot that was immediately coming back for me, and then I would try to do those things, and it just was clunky. It was
Mhm.
not working, and I'm like, that's weird. I know I was able to do these things fine in the original one, so it really was like they didn't take the time to really port it well, is what I felt
Mhm.
like, which is kind of odd to me. I don't know, but
Yeah,
and
it's
disappointing in that
it
regard.
seems
Yeah.
very copy paste type thing. Like
Hmm.
they put very little effort into making something good again. I remember the
Hmm.
controls being challenging to learn on the N64, but I got through
Yeah.
it, and I
Hmm.
imagine I could eventually get through this game, but it wasn't worth
I don't
it.
know.
It's not fun.
Because I mean, just aiming too was a huge problem for me. Like you're saying, like it had a really weird rubber band thing, and it's like there's almost no way to overcome that when you needed to. So yeah.
Right. Pinpointing, like, you would get this machine gun that had kind of a wild rate of fire, but that almost helped you that the shots weren't going straight because you could
Hmm.
point just at them and hope
Yeah.
hope that one of the wild shots would hit them rather than the
Yeah.
ones where you were actually pointing. Um, a strange challenge that was more frustrating than engaging. A couple positive things on the gameplay that is more me remembering, only having touched the game for through a couple levels, was you get three characters in this game that you can
Hmm.
switch between, and they all have slightly different weapons and whatnot. You get to play one of the characters is a dog with like a gun strapped to his back, which was
Hmm.
kind of
And
cute,
he
and
could
also
fly.
and he could hover.
Yeah.
I think they all eventually get jetpacks at some point. Um, but that's just kind of goofy and also a little bit terrifying. And there's a little bit of a progression system where you get to upgrade your ammo capacity and your health capacity
Mhm.
as you explore the levels, which was pretty novel for the time, and I really enjoyed that. And if the control systems had been updated, I might have even tried to stick it out and
Yeah.
experience that again. The weapons were pretty fun, just like kind of the Ratchet and Clank thing, and
Hmm.
yeah, that was something. And also, it was
Yeah.
an old game. Where I ended up leaving off was the second level, where you have to save one of your uh, fellow Jet Force Gemini members from a prison. And I got to the prison, and I'm like, okay, how do I get them out of this prison cell? There's no explanation. And then I start looking around, and there is a panel on the wall that kind of stands out. And when you hover your reticule over it, it'll glow red like it's a target. So I shot it and like, oh, the force fields have dropped. Wonderful. No, one force field had dropped out of like 10. In reality, I had to go back through the entire level that I'd just gone through because there had been panels hidden in various places. Again,
Oh,
this is a game where it's not easy to aim. Uh, and
yeah.
so I was like, well, I could either go back and find these other 9 panels hidden throughout this big level, or I could just call it good and move on with my life. So I moved on. Um, shall we oh, I guess there's still story and final thoughts. There's not a lot of story, so we could probably kind of
No,
jumble those together. Anything else you want to talk about Jet Force Gemini on?
no, I feel like we covered it because we both had we were only going to do it as a B segment, and then I think we both were feeling it, and you messaged me first, and we're like, hey, let's maybe do something else. I'm like, I'm with you already.
Yeah, I will
So,
say I played a little bit of Jet Force Gemini, got very frustrated, played Goldeneye, and then came back for a little more Jet Force Gemini, and
oh,
that helped a
still bad.
little bit, but
Oh, really?
I still bailed on it
Okay.
because they do have kind of unfortunately similar control schemes, so I got used to it.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I feel like nostalgia kind of made this seem like a better game, and especially with
Well,
the poor port. I think this doesn't hold up very well, and
no, but
maybe
I
isn't
think a
worth
lot of it was a
playing.
poor port. I mean,
Yeah.
GoldenEye's. Sorry, I know I'm interrupting you a little bit, but I mean, and maybe GoldenEye has the better nostalgia factor for us that we'll get
Hmm.
into. But I mean, and it does in some ways. I still think we had a lot of fun with Jet Force Gemini, and I mean, like when you said it, there were so many things that came back about the game in my head when you suggested it, and so it's been on my mind, for years. It just was sad that it was not a good port.
Hmm.
So I think that was a lot of it. I don't think
One
nostalgia was bad. It
one thing
just, yeah.
one thing I remember reading as I was doing some research on this is there was a second port of Jet Force Gemini that Rare released. I can't
Mm,
remember what it was called, but for the computer or something like that. And they actually did update the controls in that one, and then
hmm.
didn't in the Switch port. Like they had modern shooter controls with aiming and moving and strafing on one stick, aiming on another stick, but for whatever reason they took it back out for the Switch port, which just
The
is
copy and paste.
even worse. Like you did the work
Yeah,
once and you didn't carry that over. I
yeah.
questionable
I don't know.
decisions.
Yeah.
So we do need to update our
Hmm.
rating system a little bit since again
Okay.
these are the 20-plus-year-old games, unfortunately. So it's probably not worth discussing whether or not we'd play a hypothetical sequel at this point. And so what I was going to
Oh,
pitch instead is we still do our 0 to 2 thumbs up each, and then
okay.
we have a potential point if we think it was worth playing, and then a potential point if the nostalgia holds up. Like if you are
So it could
nostalgic
be
for
4 points
this game,
total.
uh, well, 2 for each of us, and then potentially 1 more point if it's worth playing, and 1 more point if the nostalgia is positive for this game.
Okay.
Does that sound good?
Sure.
Okay. Um,
Sorry, I said that more just for this game.
yeah, yeah.
Poor
Unfortunate for
game.
Jet Force Gemini.
Poor game.
I am giving Jet Force Gemini 0 thumbs up. This port specifically, I probably would have at least given it 1 if they had updated those controls. But gonna be a 0 from me. How about you?
I'm actually trying to decide between a 1 and a 0 because it has a bit of potential, but yeah, I think I'm going to do 0 also. It just,
Hmm.
this version of it was so bad.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Would you describe, like, if you're trying to tell someone, is this worth playing? Would you say yes or no?
Again, on the virtual console, I would say no, it is not.
I agree with that. So we'll be 0
Yeah.
points for the worth playing.
Yeah.
How about the nostalgia factor? Like, did re-experiencing
Yeah.
this game feel positive and good to you?
It sadly did not. Like, if you're talking about in those terms, because I'm
Uh,
afraid to go back to it, like on the actual 64, if just in case it was actually bad and somehow we were just amazing gamers back then, we could overcome all of this. I don't know. Like, so I would actually give it a 0. It was a little bit negative for me.
I decided to give it a 1 in the nostalgia factor, largely
Okay.
because those sound effects felt good, and
Okay.
I enjoyed the colorful nature of it. So unfortunately, we'll split that point, and we'll call it a 0.5 out of 6 for Jet Force
Okay.
Gemini. Very unfortunate. I'm
Uh,
so sorry, Jet
yeah.
Force. You deserved better. Probably
Yeah.
could have done better with a little control updating, but let's not dwell on that negativeness. Let's go on to
Yeah.
Goldeneye, and hopefully that will do a little bit better. Um, Goldeneye, again, made
Sounds good
2
to me.
years earlier than Jet Force by the same team,
Yeah.
except it is first person, and it is a probably the most celebrated movie tie-in game that I can think of. Um, Movie tie-in games
Mm-hmm.
traditionally laughably bad and not worth your time, but this one is a classic.
Mm-hmm.
So first
Kind of
person,
has its
same team.
own life, apart from the movie too,
Hmm.
in some ways. So, yeah.
So let's jump in again. Presentation. What do you think about the presentation of Goldeneye as a?
That
Let's see.
when we decided to play this and when I started playing, I was surprised because I was expecting it to have that same um, frustration of presentation that Jet Force Gemini did,
Hmm.
but they translated everything well. I mean, it keeps the 64-bit graphics, but
Hmm.
they at least like translated it so that you can actually see things and see things rightly.
Hmm.
And I liked. I mean, I always remembered like the faces were vague.
Hmm.
like details were vague even for that time, even though we knew it. And so, but that was part of the like cheese factor of it, I think. And
Hmm.
so I wondered if it really was, or if it's somehow they were going to update it, and I was glad to see that it's still so vague. You can barely make out that it's James Bond, which happened in the N64 days too, and that was so wonderful to me. To have, like,
The faces were very special. This is definitely something worth Googling if you have a sec,
so many.
because it's just it looks so strange. It probably was like amazing technology for 97,
Oh yeah,
1997, but it's just so it's effectively kind of
no,
lines added to a
yes,
blocky face
yes.
that implied a real world actor, Pierce Brosnan or Sean Bean, the stars of this
Famke
film.
Janssen, yeah,
And yeah, but it looks very strange. They are vaguely recognizable. Like if I look at
yeah,
the James Bond, I'll be like, oh yeah,
it's like,
that's
yeah,
Pierce Brosnan, I think,
yeah.
which is
Like
just
well,
funny.
and it's enough too of like because there's been several actors who do James Bond. Like you would not mistake it for like the Sean Connery James Bond or something like
Right.
that. Like it's enough to be
Maybe a
that's a
Dalton.
Pierce Brosnan one. That's true
um,
actually. Yeah.
So I do think kind of nostalgia worked for this game. It looks
Hmm.
old. It is old. That's just a reality of playing old games, is they aren't going to be as visually impressive. But it felt good to return to these levels and these worlds and
Yeah,
to see these characters again.
but actually they got. I mean, like I don't think frame rate is a big issue to put these games on, but I was a little concerned that like somehow frame rate wasn't quite gonna work with modern stuff, but like it worked really well. Like everything was
Mhm.
smooth. I feel like for it being those graphics and having to translate to bigger screens and like bigger resolution screens, it's very smooth and there's enough detail to know what you're doing, which is again, it just really surprised me how well the
Mhm.
presentation was for this game on the virtual console. Yeah.
Indeed. Let's go on to gameplay, and let's hit that same topic of how did the controls feel to you in this game, being they are pretty similar to Jet Force Gemini's controls, with the exception
Hmm.
of first person versus third person. How did that feel?
Well, but there's still similarity because you again like you still had to you're basically doing the same things and you basically have limited controls between them. Um, this was way better. Like
Hmm.
it, because even with Jet Force Gemini, like I was going into it with a lot of intuition from or instinct is a better, not intuition, instinct. I had a lot of instinct from having played it, and I had the same with Goldeneye, but um, that translated immediately. Like things that I remembered, and in like it felt like for me, the problem with the controls were not the controls itself in the virtual console. It just was like, oh, I need to remember to strafe. I do this instead of that or
Hmm.
something. Like it was still trying to play it as a PlayStation first person shooter and not thinking through of like, oh, that's right, I need to do this button instead. So it more had to do with me than it actually being a translation problem. I mean, I hate to compare it again to Jet Force Gemini, but I think I have to. The instinct was there, but the translation didn't happen. Like it didn't work out. So I like the controls a lot better in Goldeneye. Yeah.
Yeah, it just functioned better because in GoldenEye with this, I I think I've heard some people describe it as tank controls, because
Mm.
it's kind
Oh
of
yeah.
awkward to pilot.
Yeah.
Um, but it worked better because the first person would you just need to point yourself at it, while
Hmm.
with Jet Force Gemini, your character moved independently of the camera often, which made it harder
Yeah.
to see what you were even pointing at, um, for the aim to kick in. One thing I found slightly less appealing about GoldenEye when compared to modern shooters, though, is because you aren't really aiming very often. You again can press a button to switch your controls from movement to aiming, um, and because you're not really aiming the guns, it feels disengaged. So, welcome back from a little internet hiccup on our end, and we were talking about, or I was talking about how I felt a little bit of a disconnect with the GoldenEye versus kind of a modern shooter, um,
Hmm.
because GoldenEye, you're largely just pointing yourself at the enemy, and then the game will automatically aim the gun just a little bit to point at them, which
Hmm.
feels less cool to me. When you're playing a shooter, often it feels like, oh, I just did that impressive shot. In this game, it's I pointed myself at the bad guys and pushed the trigger. And in a sense, that's all shooters, I suppose. But also, it's it didn't feel as good because you aren't able to aim,
Okay.
and therefore there was kind of a little bit of a disconnect in that sense.
Okay.
It was fine. It played a lot better than Jet Force Gemini, which was lovely, but it wasn't quite what I wanted. Also,
Mm.
um,
Okay.
on the gameplay, I was surprised how big this game was. Um, I played through 8 or 9 of they're pretty short, like bite-sized levels.
Yeah.
But it's a long game, and I was like, oh, maybe I'm
Hmm.
like halfway through after 8 or 9 levels. Nah, there's I was like 2 out of 9 missions in, and I was like, wow,
Hmm.
this is a big game, impressively large.
And I kind of forgot too how it broke everything up, because I remember doing a lot of the stuff that I ended
Hmm.
up doing, but I thought that they were more combined in like one level, but it ended up like sometimes it would be two or three. So
Hmm.
um, yeah, that was surprising to me too.
I did have a lot of fun. The levels, are just following the movie. Again, this is a movie tie-in game for the '95 Pierce Brosnan film Goldeneye. Um, and
Hmm.
but it's
Very
exciting. You hit all
popular
the
one.
highlights.
Hmm.
You are jumping off a dam. You are infiltrating a base through their vents into their bathroom, which
You're
is weird and
blowing up
funny.
Trevlon. Yeah.
Yeah, you are accidentally betraying your friend slash he was already betraying you. Spoilers for a very old movie.
Eh, my gosh,
uh,
that it is now 30 over
just
30
about
years old. Or no, just about 30 years old.
just
Yeah.
about 30 years old.
Yeah.
I'm glad you found big head mode in the video
DK
that you're
mode.
displaying.
DK mode.
Classic, classic
So fun.
cheat codes. Um, very, very fun game to modify. Uh, I did not explore the multiplayer at all. I wasn't planning to. Did you happen to look into that at all?
No, I didn't. So here, like, the funny thing is, this there hasn't been as big of a distance in time from the last time I played it, because
Oh, really?
I actually still have our 64.
Hmm.
So I brought it out at one point a few years ago, and I played it just to just to see if I still liked it, basically.
Hmm.
Because you and I figured something really fun out to do with multiplayer that I did when I brought the N64 back out. I don't know if you remember the trick that if you were playing alone in multiplayer,
Oh yeah. You
the N64 controllers, you could
just rubber band
if
it.
when you started up the N64, if you held a controller joystick to a side, then it essentially would like constantly like move that. Like it
Hmm.
just was something wrong with the controllers and the way that happened. We had such a system to get that to work to do multiplayer, because that's essentially, I mean, there's no bots. You couldn't have bots, so
Right.
that was our way of doing bots back in
Right.
the day.
Yeah, we just strap a controller in one direction or
Hmm.
set it so that it was stuck in that direction at start,
Yep.
and
Yeah.
then we could play the two of us together hunting bots and see who could hunt the
Yeah.
most bots because it would just respawn
Yes.
them after a few seconds, and
Yeah.
you just have to go find them, and that was pretty entertaining, surprisingly.
Well,
Um,
because yeah, and a lot of times I remember like they'd just be running around in a circle, so you'd stumble upon them and they're just going around in a circle, and you're like, "All right." But all that to say, to explain, that was actually why I did not touch the multiplayer in the virtual console, because I knew there was no way for me
right. Do
to do
that.
that.
You'd have
Essentially,
to
yeah.
play with real people, and where's the fun in that?
Hmm.
um, I think that was so much of what GoldenEye was the multiplayer.
It
The
was.
base
Oh
game
yeah,
is fine. It's very good.
yeah,
But the multiplayer is what made it kind of a legendary title.
yeah.
And
I
I
definitely
I
played
do
more of the
believe this
multiplayer in the
does.
day.
Yeah, I do believe you still can play the multiplayer on the Switch Online version. It's just uh, not as it's not the same as when you're in high school
No.
and you get four of your friends together in the same room.
Hmm.
Um, the story and final thoughts for GoldenEye. Again, this is an older game with kind of a bare bones story, but if you had seen the movie, which I actually did try to go back and watch because I thought that would be fun,
Oh yeah.
but it's not on any streaming services, and I didn't feel like
Oh,
renting it.
surprising.
Um,
Yeah.
but with the movie, it's very fun. It adds that drama and action and adventure, and you get to be Pierce Brosnan doing all these cool things. Without that, if you didn't know the movie, I don't think you would find the story very impressive.
Yeah. No, I think what helps it though is the way that it sets up each mission. I know it's really basic, but I mean I think they do a fun thing with having the folder, so it's
Dossiers?
kind of
Yeah.
at least says that you're a spy. Like we interpret that as like I'm a spy. I have to do something spyish, and
hmm
so I think
I,
that
I,
helps
yeah, I think the
very
dossiers were
simply and weirdly. Yeah,
reasonably well written, and they're all the characters from the movie are in there, cues telling you to stop breaking his stuff. Moneypenny's flirting with you, and you're getting a briefing on what the action is in the moment coming up. And it was well written. It was nice. It
yeah,
added what you needed to um, have the story.
yeah.
So shall we rate the game? I
Let's
hope
go
this
for
one
it.
does
Sure.
better. Uh, I think I'm giving GoldenEye 1 thumb up. I
Oh,
still am
okay.
not super happy about the controls. They're fine.
Okay.
They're, again, frustratingly authentic, but they did do much better than uh, Jet Force Gemini because of the first person
Okay.
perspective, I think. Um,
Hmm.
I would say I had fun with it. I don't know if I would ever be inclined to play the entire game, but I think most people would have a good few hours with the game. How about yourself?
I would actually give it 2 thumbs. I
Okay.
really enjoyed it. I thought it was a great port,
hmm
and I I think, like I said, like I found the controls. I think I probably found the controls a little bit nicer and for my tastes than you were. So I give it 2 thumbs. Yeah.
Makes sense. How about would you say this game is worth playing to somebody that had the Switch Online pass?
Yes, I would say absolutely. Yeah.
I am gonna agree and say
Okay.
yes as well. So 1 point there. I was thinking about maybe no because it's just like because we've separated nostalgia from is it worth playing.
we
Um,
yeah.
I think if you're nostalgic for the game, you will have fun. If you weren't nostalgic for the game, would I recommend it? It'd be worth exploring, if only to see a piece of video game history.
Well, there's not a lot. I think that's one part of it too. Like this is a very early first person shooter. Like there was just
hmm
not a lot out there. And so I think for that reason it's history. And then secondly, there's just not a lot of first person shooters that are on the virtual console anyway.
hmm
So if you're looking for a good one, this would be it. Yeah.
hmm That's fair. And then the nostalgia factor. Did it re- pleasantly create nostalgia for you?
It did really well. Yeah.
Me as well.
So one, yeah.
It brought me right back there. Very impressive
Hmm.
GoldenEye. That is a 5 out of 6.
Yeah.
Not
Yeah.
half bad. Um,
I I
taking the lead.
mean I would, if it were a bad port like Jet Force Gemini, I mean, we would have to rate it low. That would make me so sad because
hmm
it's a big nostalgia factor for us. I have to tell a quick story because we're
Sure.
talking about GoldenEye. So, and again, like I'm going to age myself. I don't care. So much like we are having in this season of weather, we had heavy rain going on, and this was back when I was in high school, and so the high school front got flooded. So we basically, this is in California, so we don't really have snow days. This was like the only snow day that we ever had for California, Southern California stuff, and so we didn't have to go to school that day. Um, we were on, and some of my friends, like we were up towards a on the top of a hill basically from the high school, and so we were all able to get together and just like call everyone up and like, hey, come over. Like you could drive the rest of the town, so we all just played Goldeneye like the whole day, which was such a blast. And like, yeah, and which says so much. I mean, a lot of my friends were really good at it. So multiplayer, the way we'd always do it is like you had like we would rotate where it was either the top two or the top person got to stay in, and then you would rotate out everybody else. So it was constantly like you're trying to beat that top person so that you could stay or something else. And it was hard. Some of the friends that I had. Anyway, that is a big nostalgia for me, and this lived up for it. I wish that I could have done the bots in the multiplayer, but I mean, I didn't even try. I don't know if there is a way, but I don't think there is. So
Very
anyway,
fun.
reminiscing old times.
So
Yeah.
coming up next, we have yet another Chrono Trigger recap pod. We are both of us, I think, we left off the last episode being like, I know what happens next, but not why.
Yeah.
So we'll be
Yeah.
revisiting that question to see if anything came up in our memories last month. And then for
Yeah.
our next main episode, we're going to be looking at both Legend of Zelda: Link to the Past, and because it's a Link to the
Mhm.
Past, we're going to play original Legend of Zelda as well. So probably spending most of our time on Link to the Past, but also revisiting the classic Zelda,
Yeah.
and that should be fun. That'll be fun to discuss and compare the two and see how the game progressed over that era. Beyond that, you can send questions and corrections to twobrothersPlayAGame@gmail.com. And you can also find us on Twitter and YouTube at twobrothersPAG. Chris, are you still doing live streams? I forgot to check if you had
I
any new
am.
ones up.
I did one which I was showing some of the video of Goldeneye, and then I do a lot of Disney Speedstorm,
Nice.
just because I have that on a Nintendo Switch. So why not show that off? So there might be some Lego Star Wars Skywalker Saga in the near future, because I've started to play that a little late to that game, but I have it. So I'm having a lot of fun with it. So
Nice.
that's been something I thought about live streaming as well.
Please review us on iTunes if you can spare a minute. That would help us a lot. And Chris, if you were to devote some resources to updating Jet Force Gemini like it really needed, would you invest those into modernizing the controls, or would you just add some lovely mountains?
I would go with mountains because mountains are nice.
This is life.